What if the very act of posthumously honoring a martyr, far from preserving their legacy, often distorts and ultimately consumes the truth of their sacrifice? It's a provocative claim, I know. We are taught, from childhood, to revere those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for a cause greater than themselves. We build monuments, name streets, write histories, and craft narratives designed to elevate their deeds to mythic proportions. And on the surface, this seems noble, essential even, for the cohesion of societies, for the transmission of values. But what if, beneath this well-intentioned veneration, lies a subtle, insidious process? What if the collective desire to sanctify, to simplify, to utilize the power of a life ended tragically, actually serves to sever us from the nuanced, complex, and often uncomfortable truths of that very sacrifice? Today, we delve into what I call the martyrdom machine, the societal and political apparatus that takes genuine, often profound, human sacrifice and transforms it into a sanitized, weaponized symbol, often at the expense of authentic understanding and critical thought. We are going to explore how this machine, through the conferring of political honors and public sanctification, operates not merely to remember, but to repurpose and often corrupt the truth of an individual's life and death. Think of it. A person dies for a belief, for a nation, for an ideal. Their death is immediate, visceral, perhaps tragic. But then, almost instantly, a process begins. The person is no longer just a person, they become the martyr. Their motivations, which might have been a messy tapestry of conviction, desperation, personal circumstance, and even fear, are distilled into a singular, unwavering purity. Their life, with all its human failings, its contradictions, its internal struggles, is polished until it shines with an unblemished, iconic gleam. This isn't just history being written, it's history being sculpted, often by hands more concerned with future political utility than past empirical accuracy. We see this across cultures, across millennia. From the early Christian martyrs whose stories shaped an entire faith, to the revolutionary figures whose legacies still ignite political fervor, to the soldiers whose names adorn cenotaphs, their individual stories often disappear behind the grand narrative of their ultimate act. The profound grief, the specific circumstances, the philosophical nuances of their choices are often smoothed over, replaced by a simple, digestible, and politically convenient fable. In this episode of The Third Citizen, we will dare to ask the uncomfortable questions. When does honoring a sacrifice become exploiting it? How do the incentives of political power and collective memory distort the individual's truth? What is lost when we elevate someone to martyrdom? And what does it mean for us, the living, who inherit these carefully constructed legacies? We will examine the subtle ways truth is eroded, dissent is suppressed, and how genuine human complexity is sacrificed on the altar of a manufactured heroism. Our aim is not to diminish genuine bravery, but to strip away the layers of political expediency and ideological convenience that often obscure it, allowing us to see these profound acts of sacrifice with greater clarity and intellectual honesty. This is about refusing to let the past be hijacked by the present's political agenda, about honoring truth over convenience, and about understanding the profound cost when we allow the martyrdom machine to run unchecked. Let us begin with the very essence of sacrifice, disentangling it from the shimmering veil of external honor. What truly defines a genuine sacrifice? It is, almost universally, an unsolicited act. It springs from an internal wellspring of conviction, from a deeply held principle, from a profound love for others, or from an unshakable adherence to truth. It is an offering, often made with no expectation of reward, no desire for recognition, and certainly no anticipation of posthumous glory. The hero who rushes into a burning building to save a stranger. The dissenter who speaks truth to power, knowing they face imprisonment or death. The parent who goes without so their child can thrive. These acts are born of an intrinsic moral imperative, not a strategic calculation for future accolades. And scheming means, 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 means. For the ancient Greeks, arete was about living up to one's full potential, about fulfilling one's purpose with courage and skill. It was an internal standard, an aspiration to embody the best human qualities. While public honor might follow such a life, it was not the driving force. The act itself, the commitment to the good, was the reward. The moment the expectation of external validation, of a public award or a lasting memorial, enters the equation, the purity of the sacrifice begins to be compromised. It subtly shifts from an act of unvarnished duty or love to an act with an added layer of potential self-interest, however subconscious. This distinction is crucial when we consider what the martyrdom machine does. It steps in, often after the fact, and imposes a framework of external honor onto an internal act. It takes a life, a death, that might have been messy, complex, and personally motivated, and it reinscribes it with a new, collective meaning. The individual's personal journey is subsumed by a public narrative, transforming a singular experience into a communal symbol. This is where the corruption begins. Not necessarily a malicious corruption of the individual's intent, but a systemic corruption of the meaning of their act. Think of the Stoic philosopher Seneca, who faced his execution under Nero with calm and philosophical composure. His final hours were spent debating the nature of the soul, offering comfort to his weeping friends, and meticulously tending to his last will. His sacrifice was for his principles, for his integrity, for his philosophy. The act of maintaining his composure in the face of death was an embodiment of his lifelong commitment to Stoic ideals. He wasn't performing for a posthumous award. He was living his philosophy to its final breath. His virtue was its own reward. But then, imagine if immediately after his death, Nero had ironically decided to declare him a national hero, renaming a forum after him and commissioning grand statues. While this never happened, such an act would instantaneously refashion Seneca's quiet, principled stand into a state-sanctioned spectacle. The profound personal resonance of his final moments, his authentic adherence to his own truth, would be diluted by the overwhelming weight of political appropriation. His death would no longer be just an example of Stoic resolve, but a data point in a political narrative, a symbol to be deployed. This highlights the profound difference between dying for a belief and dying for veneration. When an individual dies for a belief, their agency, their personal conviction is paramount. Their act is an extension of their inner world, their moral compass. They may hope their sacrifice inspires others, but the primary impetus is internal. When one dies, or is portrayed as dying, for veneration, the external gaze, the societal need for a hero, becomes the dominant force. The narrative of their death is crafted to fulfill a public yearning, often irrespective of the private reality. The martyrdom machine excels at this transformation. It seizes upon the authentic core of an individual's sacrifice, be it courage, conviction, or commitment, and then meticulously reframes it for public consumption. It strips away the individual's particularity, their quirks, their doubts, their human frailties, and replaces them with a perfectly chiseled ideal. This idealized figure then becomes a vessel, a blank slate onto which the collective's current ideological needs can be projected. The true nature of their sacrifice, often nuanced and deeply personal, is overshadowed by the collective's insatiable hunger for an unblemished symbol, a narrative that serves the living more than it honors the dead. It is a profound philosophical sleight of hand, subtly eroding truth in the name of manufactured inspiration. Now, let us turn our attention to the second of our exploration, the engineering of an icon, how the martyrdom machine operates. Having examined the intrinsic nature of sacrifice and how it differs from externally imposed honor, we must now dissect the very mechanisms by which this transformation occurs. This isn't a spontaneous process, it is a meticulously crafted operation, a deliberate act of narrative construction that repurposes a human life and death for a specific ideological agenda. The first step in engineering an icon is often the selection and simplification of a life. When an individual dies under circumstances deemed politically useful, especially if it is sudden, violent, or perceived as unjust, the machine quickly identifies its raw material. This individual, previously a complex human being with a full range of thoughts, emotions, flaws, and perhaps even contradictions, is immediately subject to a process of purification. Their story is streamlined, stripped of nuance. Doubts, personal struggles, dissenting opinions they may have held, or even character flaws are either conveniently omitted, subtly reframed as virtues, or simply erased from the emergent narrative. What remains is a monolithic, unblemished figure, a canvas perfectly prepared for the projection of collective ideals. Consider the archetype of the revolutionary martyr. In the immediate aftermath of their death, their life story is swiftly curated. Early biographies or official accounts will emphasize their unwavering commitment, their prophetic vision, their selfless dedication to the cause, often overlooking any instances of strategic compromise, personal ambition, or ideological inconsistencies they might have exhibited in life. Their words are distilled into potent, easily quotable slogans. Their image is stylized, often made youthful, determined, and heroic, regardless of their actual appearance or demeanor. This deliberate simplification is crucial because a complex human being invites critical thought, but an icon demands unquestioning devotion. Next, the machine deploys a powerful array of tools for dissemination and canonization. Foremost among these is propaganda, not in the crude sense of outright lies, but in the sophisticated application of narrative control. Official statements, controlled media outlets, and carefully crafted public pronouncements begin to weave the new, simplified story of the martyr. Educational materials are updated to include their hagiography, ensuring that future generations learn only the approved version of their heroism. Art, poetry, and music are commissioned to celebrate their sacrifice, further embedding their image and story into the collective consciousness. This process extends to the physical world through carefully curated memorials and rituals. Statues are erected, streets are renamed, public holidays are declared, and museums are dedicated to the fallen hero. These tangible markers serve as constant reminders, solidifying the narrative in the physical landscape. Anniversaries of their birth or death become sacred occasions, celebrated with elaborate ceremonies, parades, and speeches that reinforce the prescribed meaning of their sacrifice. These rituals are not merely acts of remembrance. They are acts of ideological reaffirmation, drawing emotional power from the martyr's image to galvanize support for the current political agenda. The immediate canonization of certain figures is another critical aspect of this engineering. Unlike historical figures, who might undergo generations of academic scrutiny before their legacies settle, a politically useful martyr is often elevated almost instantaneously. This rapid apotheosis serves a vital function. It preempts critical inquiry. By swiftly bestowing an almost sacred status upon the individual, the machine makes it incredibly difficult, even taboo, to question their perfection or the official narrative surrounding them. To do so is often framed as disrespecting the dead, undermining the nation, or betraying the cause, thereby effectively silencing dissent and intellectual curiosity. His systematic transformation from a complex human being to an impeccable symbol is not accidental. It is the sophisticated work of the martyrdom machine, a well-oiled mechanism designed to convert the tragic reality of a death into a powerful, malleable asset. The aim is to create an idealized archetype that serves the collective needs of the ruling power or movement, rather than to accurately represent the individual's authentic reality. This manufactured heroism, therefore, becomes a potent instrument for shaping public perception, consolidating power, and forging a shared identity, all built upon a carefully constructed and often incomplete version of truth. Having established how the martyrdom machine identifies its subjects and begins the process of engineering an icon, we now turn to what is perhaps its most insidious operation, the corruption of truth, from human being to impeccable symbol. This is where the subtle alchemy of political narrative takes hold, transforming the messy, complex reality of a human life into a gleaming, simplified archetype, often at the direct expense of honesty and historical accuracy. Every human being is a tapestry of contradictions, evolving thoughts, moments of doubt, and an array of personal triumphs and failings. Our motivations are rarely singular. They are often a confluence of ideals, ambitions, insecurities, and circumstances. However, the martyrdom machine cannot tolerate such complexity. It demands purity, unwavering resolve, and a moral clarity that few mortals ever achieve. Thus, the first and most critical step in the corruption of truth is the systematic erasure or convenient overlooking of these nuances, doubts, flaws, and internal struggles. The chosen individual's biography is meticulously edited, not with a red pen, but with a rhetorical scalpel, removing anything that might tarnish the emerging heroic image. Consider the example of a historical figure who, in their lifetime, expressed views that might now be considered problematic or held grudges against rivals, or perhaps even made strategic compromises that, in retrospect, appear less than noble. When the martyrdom machine gets to work, these inconvenient truths are either airbrushed from the record, subtly reinterpreted as signs of genius or foresight, or simply buried under an avalanche of celebratory narratives. A leader who struggled with indecisiveness in real time becomes a resolute visionary. A figure known for a sharp temper or personal prejudices is presented as universally compassionate and benevolent. The intricate web of their private life, with all its human entanglements, is replaced by a sterile, one-dimensional portrayal of unwavering virtue. The aim is not to present an accurate historical account, but to forge an archetype that serves the collective's current ideological needs, a symbol whose perfection cannot be questioned without undermining the very cause it represents. This leads us to the heart of the matter, the creation of an idealized archetype that serves collective needs rather than individual reality. The machine is not interested in the person who lived, but in the idea of what that person should have been for the purposes of the present. This idealized figure becomes a potent tool. It provides a rallying point, a moral standard, an example to follow for a specific political objective. This figure is so perfectly aligned with the prevailing ideology that to criticize them is to criticize the ideology itself. The martyr becomes less a historical individual and more a mirror reflecting the aspirations, the propaganda, and the collective self-image of the group that canonizes them. Their story is no longer truly their own. It is a meticulously crafted fable for the living. Furthermore, this corruption of truth manifests in three distinct ways: suppression, reinterpretation, and in more extreme cases, outright fabrication. Suppression (moon) involves the deliberate withholding of facts. Documents that might shed an unflattering light on the martyr are conveniently lost or classified. Testimonies from contemporaries that challenge the official narrative are dismissed as biased or unreliable. Critical scholarship is ignored or actively discouraged. The historical record, far from being a complete mosaic, becomes a carefully curated exhibition where only approved pieces are displayed. This isn't just about omission. It's about actively preventing a full, truthful understanding from emerging. Reinterpretation is a more subtle and perhaps more common form of corruption. Here, facts are not necessarily denied, but their meaning is twisted. A pragmatic political decision, made for complex reasons, is recontextualized as a heroic moral stand. A controversial statement made by the individual is reframed to align perfectly with the current party line. Motivations are reascribed, turning a moment of calculated self-interest into an act of profound altruism. This is the art of rhetorical gymnastics, where language is employed to bend reality into a shape more palatable and politically useful. For instance, a figure who advocated for gradual change might be posthumously rebranded as a radical revolutionary, or vice versa, depending on the shifting needs of the political moment. In more egregious instances, we see fabrication, the outright invention of stories, quotes, or events that never occurred. While harder to execute in the age of widespread information, this has historically been a powerful tool in societies with tight control over information. Legendary tales of miraculous deeds, inspiring last words never uttered, or encounters with significant figures that never happened are woven into the martyr's story to enhance their mythical stature. This deliberate fabrication pushes Arendt's concept of the erosion of truth to its extreme, making the distinction between fact and fiction utterly irrelevant in the service of political utility. Ultimately, the goal of this corruption is to solidify an unassailable image that serves a present-day agenda. By erasing human flaws and forging an impeccable symbol, the martyrdom machine constructs a narrative so perfect that questioning it feels akin to sacrilege. This process doesn't just distort the past, it fundamentally alters our collective understanding of virtue, heroism, and the very nature of truth, leaving us with a history that is less a chronicle of what was and more a blueprint for what a powerful few wish us to believe. Having explored how the martyrdom machine engineers an icon and corrupts truth by simplifying individual lives into impeccable symbols, we now arrive at a critical consequence of this process: the silencing mechanism, how martyrdom stifles critical inquiry. This is perhaps the most insidious impact, as it doesn't merely distort history. It actively suppresses the very intellectual curiosity and healthy skepticism essential for a vibrant civic discourse and a rigorous understanding of the past. The veneration of a designated martyr often creates a powerful societal taboo against questioning the narrative surrounding them. To do so is frequently labeled as disrespect, disloyalty, or even sacrilege. Once an individual has been elevated to a sacred status, especially if their death is framed as a sacrifice for the collective, any attempt to explore the nuances, complexities, or potential flaws in their life, or the circumstances of their death, is immediately met with fierce resistance. This resistance is often emotionally charged, designed to shut down inquiry rather than engage with it. For instance, in many cultures, questioning the heroism of founding fathers or fallen soldiers is perceived as an attack on national identity itself, regardless of any evidence that might suggest a more complex reality. The martyr's image becomes a shield, deflecting any critical examination of the ideology or regime that benefits from their glorification. This societal taboo has a profound chilling effect on critical historical analysis, academic freedom, and public discourse. Historians, scholars, and journalists who attempt to offer a more balanced or revisionist perspective on a revered martyr often face professional backlash, public condemnation, and even threats. Their research might be dismissed as unpatriotic or ideologically motivated, regardless of its rigor or the strength of its evidence. In educational settings, teachers might shy away from presenting challenging historical perspectives for fear of parental or administrative censure. This creates an environment where intellectual honesty is penalized and conformity to the established narrative is rewarded. The consequence is a stagnant historical understanding, where the past is not a dynamic field of inquiry, but a static shrine to be revered. Instead of encouraging deep, empathetic, and multifaceted engagement with complex historical figures, the machine promotes a superficial, worshipful adherence to simplified myths. This not only impoverishes our understanding of history, but also leaves us ill-equipped to critically assess present-day figures and events. If we cannot question our heroes, how can we truly learn from their lives or from the systems they operated within? Perhaps most alarmingly, the veneration of martyrs can be weaponized to suppress dissent and demand unquestioning allegiance to a particular ideology or regime. By holding up the unblemished martyr as the ultimate exemplar of loyalty and sacrifice, those in power can implicitly or explicitly demand a similar level of commitment from the living. Any deviation from the official line, any questioning of authority, any independent thought that challenges the status quo can be cast as a betrayal of the martyr's legacy. "Are you not as loyal as our glorious martyr X?" becomes a powerful rhetorical bludgeon. This tactic turns the memory of the dead into a coercive force against the living, transforming remembrance into an instrument of political control. In totalitarian or authoritarian states, this weaponization is overt. The cult of personality surrounding a deceased leader or foundational figure is often used to demand absolute loyalty from the populace. Public displays of devotion to the martyr become tests of ideological purity. Even in more democratic societies, the subtle pressure to conform to a particular heroic narrative can stifle intellectual dissent, making it difficult for alternative perspectives to gain traction. The emotional weight of sacrifice, particularly death, is incredibly potent, and the martyrdom machine skillfully harnesses this emotional resonance to short-circuit rational debate and critical thinking. The cost of this silencing mechanism is immense. It starves public discourse of the necessary oxygen of critical inquiry. It prevents societies from truly grappling with their past, acknowledging mistakes, and fostering growth. When we are afraid to question, we are condemned to repeat. By understanding how the martyrdom machine stifles critical thought, we can begin to resist its coercive power and reclaim the intellectual freedom essential for a truly engaged and informed citizenry. We have seen how the martyrdom machine constructs its icons and corrupts the truth surrounding their lives. Now, we delve into how these meticulously crafted symbols are deployed, leveraging sacrifice, the martyr as a political instrument. This is where the emotional power of a fallen hero is expertly weaponized, transforming a tragic individual death into potent fuel for collective action, used to consolidate power, legitimate rule, unify populations, or demonize enemies. Political leaders and movements are acutely aware of the deep human need for heroes and the powerful emotional resonance of sacrifice. They understand that a designated martyr is not merely a figure to be mourned, but a powerful asset to be strategically employed. One primary way this occurs is in the consolidation of power and the legitimization of rule. A leader can associate themselves with the martyr's cause, framing their own governance as the fulfillment of the martyr's final wishes or the continuation of their sacred struggle. By claiming the mantle of the martyr's heir, a leader can imbue their regime with a moral authority that transcends mere political mandate. For example, revolutionary regimes frequently invoke the names of those who died in their struggle to justify harsh measures or suppress dissent, claiming to protect the revolution's sacred legacy from its enemies, both internal and external. The sacrifice becomes a holy warrant for present-day policies. Beyond legitimization, martyrs are incredibly effective at unifying diverse populations under a single banner. When a society faces external threats or internal divisions, the memory of a martyr can be evoked to forge a sense of common identity and purpose. The sacrifice, particularly if framed as being for the nation or the people, transcends individual differences and appeals to a primal sense of collective loyalty. The blood of the martyrs is frequently invoked as the cement of nation-building, demanding that all citizens set aside their minor grievances in the face of the ultimate sacrifice made on their behalf. This is a strategic use of shared grief and idealized heroism to foster cohesion and quash factionalism. The martyr becomes a totem of unity, their story a founding myth that binds people together. Conversely, the martyr's death can be strategically used to demonize perceived enemies. If a martyr is tragically lost, their death can be attributed not to complex circumstances or opposing ideologies, but to the inherent evil or perfidy of an adversary. The opponent is then cast as the murderer, the villain, the betrayer of sacred values, justifying animosity, aggression, or even retribution. This narrative simplifies geopolitical conflicts or domestic political battles into clear-cut moral struggles, where one side embodies virtue through their martyrs, and the other represents absolute evil. This makes it easier to rally support for military action, punitive policies, or intense partisan campaigns. The martyr's memory becomes a sharpened spear aimed directly at the opposition. This strategic deployment often manifests through what can be termed blood sacrifice rhetoric. This is not a casual phrase. It carries immense historical and psychological weight. In nation-building ideological struggles or calls to arms, leaders frequently declare that the new nation, the true faith, or the impending victory is bought with the blood of its martyrs. This language implies that the individual deaths were not in vain, but rather a necessary offering, a sacred investment in the future. The living are then burdened with the responsibility to ensure that this sacrifice was not wasted. This rhetorical device transforms individual suffering into a collective asset, a moral imperative for continued struggle. It demands loyalty and sustained effort, effectively turning the deceased into an eternal moral vanguard whose unmet ideals the living must now fulfill. We can see powerful historical and contemporary examples of this phenomenon. In ancient Rome, the deification of emperors post-mortem was a political act, creating a lineage of divine rulers whose legacies legitimized their successors and fostered loyalty to the empire. During the French Revolution, Jean-Paul Marat, assassinated in his bath, was swiftly canonized by the Jacobins. Jacques-Louis David's famous painting, The Death of Marat, transformed a controversial political journalist into a Christ-like martyr, his sacrifice justifying the revolutionary government's increasingly extreme measures against its enemies. His image became a symbol of revolutionary purity and a call for continued ideological fervor. In the 20th century, countless national independence movements used their fallen heroes as rallying points. Think of figures like Patrice Lumumba in Congo or Stephen Biko in South Africa. Their deaths often at the hands of oppressive regimes, became potent symbols around which nascent nations or anti-apartheid movements could unify, their stories providing a moral foundation for the struggle. These were not just figures to be remembered, but moral mandates for future action. More recently, in the sphere of contemporary politics, we see this playing out in the culture wars. The posthumous honors for figures like the conservative activists mentioned earlier, or the elevation of certain individuals involved in politically charged events, serves this exact purpose. Their stories are not merely eulogized, they are co-opted to solidify partisan narratives, to energize a base, and to demonize opposing viewpoints. The specific circumstances of their lives and deaths become less important than their utility as symbols in ongoing ideological battles. The individual is subsumed into a political project, their sacrifice weaponized, their legacy leveraged for the power games of the present. This manipulation demonstrates the profound and often disturbing power of the martyrdom machine to transform human tragedy into a potent political instrument. As we delve deeper into the intricate workings of the martyrdom machine, we uncover perhaps its most poignant and personal casualty, the erosion of authenticity, beyond the individual's own story. When a death is swiftly appropriated by a larger cause, the profound personal agency of the individual and the authentic nature of their final act can be tragically diminished, sometimes to the point of erasure. Imagine a person driven by deeply personal convictions, perhaps a quiet moral compass or a specific philosophical stance, who takes a stand knowing the risks. Their act, even if it leads to their death, is intrinsically theirs, an expression of their unique being, their particular understanding of the world. However, the moment the martyrdom machine identifies this death as politically useful, that personal story begins to dissolve. The nuanced, messy, often ambiguous motivations are stripped away, replaced by a convenient narrative dictated by the needs of the collective. The individual's last breath, their final words, their personal fears and hopes are no longer viewed through the lens of their unique humanity, but through the prism of what they can represent for an ideological agenda. Their agency is stolen, their unique narrative usurped, leaving behind a hollowed-out symbol that serves current political masters rather than honoring the full, complex truth of who they were. It's as if a poet's final, deeply personal verse is immediately taken and rewritten into a political slogan, losing all its original intimate meaning in the process. This appropriation places an immense and often invisible burden upon living individuals and future generations to conform to an idealized, often manufactured, past. Those who were intimately connected to the fallen, family members, close friends, immediate colleagues, suddenly find their loved one transformed into public property. Their personal grief and private memories are overshadowed by the grand, official narrative. They may feel immense pressure to uphold this idealized image, to selectively remember, or even to actively suppress any memories that contradict the manufactured sainthood. To speak openly about the martyr's flaws, their human struggles, or their evolving thoughts could be seen as an act of betrayal against the cause they now represent, inflicting a profound psychological toll and forcing an agonizing choice between personal truth and collective expectation. Furthermore, future generations inherit this sanitized history. They are taught about perfect heroes, flawless visionaries, and unwavering paragons of virtue. This can be psychologically damaging. It sets an impossibly high and often misleading standard, fostering a sense that genuine heroism must be without blemish, without doubt, without the messy reality of human fallibility. This manufactured past disconnects them from the real, often arduous and imperfect, process of social change and moral progress. It can lead to a kind of moral paralysis, where the fear of not living up to an unachievable ideal prevents them from taking their own, authentically imperfect, courageous stands. It breeds intellectual humility where none is needed, replacing critical engagement with reverent worship. Finally, one of the most poignant consequences is the potential for genuine human grief and remembrance to be overshadowed by political utility. Death is a deeply personal experience, and grief is a sacred, private process. Yet, when a death becomes a political spectacle, the space for authentic mourning is severely constrained. Funerals are transformed into state events, solemn ceremonies into rallies. The individual's personal legacy, the lives they touched, the small acts of kindness, the private jokes, the intricate relationships that define them, is often pushed aside in favor of a grander, more marketable narrative of sacrifice. The focus shifts from who this person was to me to what this person represents to us. This depersonalization of death can be deeply alienating for those who knew and loved the individual, forcing them to share their grief with a public that often only sees a symbol, not a person. It can leave families feeling as if their loss has been co-opted, their loved one's memory instrumentalized, rather than genuinely honored. The profound, quiet solemnity of personal remembrance is replaced by the roar of political rhetoric, leaving little room for the simple, unadorned truth of human loss. This overshadowing is a profound tragedy, as it robs both the deceased of their authentic legacy and the living of their right to mourn truthfully. We have journeyed through the intricate machinery of manufactured martyrdom, witnessing how genuine sacrifice can be twisted into a political instrument, truth corrupted into symbol, and critical inquiry silenced. But our task as third citizens is not merely to diagnose the problem. It is to seek a path toward genuine understanding and integrity. So, in our final, let us explore reclaiming nuance, honoring sacrifice without corrupting truth. This is about proposing alternative approaches to remembrance that respect profound sacrifice while actively resisting the insidious pressures of the martyrdom machine. The first and most vital step is to cultivate a deep commitment to embracing complexity. Genuine history, like genuine human experience, is rarely simple, rarely clean. It is a mosaic of motivations, circumstances, and consequences, often fraught with ambiguity. When we encounter a figure whose life or death is offered up for veneration, we must consciously resist the urge for instant simplification. Instead of seeking a perfect hero, we should seek a truthful human being. This means acknowledging their human flaws, their moments of doubt, their strategic missteps, and even their contradictions. True courage often shines brightest not in the absence of fear or flaw, but in the unwavering commitment to a principle despite them. To recognize that a revered figure was complex, imperfect, and struggled makes their ultimate act of sacrifice not less, but more profound and relatable. It demystifies heroism, making it an attainable aspiration rather than an unachievable ideal. It reminds us that ordinary people, with all their human limitations, are capable of extraordinary deeds. To foster this complexity, we must promote rigorous, critical, historical inquiry. This is the bedrock of intellectual honesty. It means encouraging historians to delve into primary sources without ideological preconceptions, to explore multiple perspectives, and to challenge established narratives, no matter how comforting they may be. It means demanding that educational institutions teach history as a dynamic process of questioning and interpretation, rather than a static collection of facts and heroic tales. Public memorials, instead of merely celebrating, could be designed to invite reflection, to pose questions, to acknowledge the difficult choices and unintended consequences that often accompany great events. Imagine a memorial that incorporates divergent viewpoints, acknowledging the different ways a single event or life might be remembered by various groups. Such an approach moves beyond simple celebration to genuine understanding. Crucially, we must learn to distinguish between authentic remembrance and blind veneration. Authentic remembrance is an act of respectful engagement with the past. It seeks to understand why a sacrifice was made, what its true context was, and what lessons, both inspiring and cautionary, it holds for the present. It acknowledges truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable or challenges our preconceived notions. It allows for critical assessment, for asking, could things have been different? Or what were the hidden costs? This form of remembrance leads to intellectual growth and a more mature collective identity. Blind veneration, on the other hand, demands intellectual submission. It insists on an unblemished narrative, silences dissent, and often serves to reinforce existing power structures or ideological dogmas. It treats the past as a sacred text, not to be analyzed, but to be worshipped. It fosters intellectual stagnation and a dangerous inability to critically assess present-day challenges, because it trains us to accept simplified narratives without question. Think of it this way. Authentic remembrance is like appreciating a complex, detailed photograph, blemishes and all, while blind veneration is like looking at a heavily airbrushed portrait designed to present a flawless, albeit unreal, image. Finally, we must actively work to foster intellectual humility in ourselves and in our communities as a framework for pursuing a nuanced understanding of sacrifice in a complex world. Intellectual humility means recognizing the limits of our own knowledge and the potential for our perspectives to be incomplete or biased. It means being open to changing our minds in the face of new evidence and being willing to grapple with ambiguity without seeking immediate, simplistic answers. It encourages us to approach historical figures not as divine beings, but as fellow humans who navigated their own complex moral landscapes. This also means cultivating empathy, the ability to imagine the circumstances, pressures, and beliefs that shaped decisions in the past without necessarily endorsing them. It means differentiating between a personal act of conviction, a collective movement, and a political manipulation, even when they overlap. By embracing intellectual humility, we build a collective capacity for critical discernment, enabling us to honor the profound sacrifices made by individuals throughout history, while simultaneously safeguarding the integrity of truth and protecting our civic discourse from the distorting lens of the martyrdom machine. It is a challenging but essential endeavor, for the health of our societies and the clarity of our collective conscience depend on it. As we draw to a close on this deep dive into the martyrdom machine, let us gather the threads of our discussion. We began by distinguishing between the intrinsic nature of genuine sacrifice, an unsolicited, often personal act of conviction, and the external gaze of honor, which can subtly alter its purity. We then pulled back the curtain on how this machine operates, revealing the systematic engineering of icons, simplifying complex lives into unblemished symbols through propaganda and curated memorials. We saw how this process fundamentally corrupts truth, transforming a multifaceted human being into an impeccable archetype by erasing flaws, reinterpreting inconvenient facts, and sometimes even fabricating narratives. This corruption, in turn, fuels a powerful silencing mechanism, where the veneration of martyrs stifles critical inquiry, academic freedom, and public discourse, often weaponized to demand unquestioning allegiance. We examine how deeply political leaders leverage sacrifice, turning individual deaths into potent instruments for consolidating power, unifying populations, and demonizing adversaries. This strategic exploitation ultimately leads to a profound erosion of authenticity, where the individual's own story is eclipsed and the genuine grief of loved ones is overshadowed by political utility. Our journey through these 7 steps has illuminated the critical imperative to reclaim nuance. It calls upon us, as third citizens, to embrace complexity, to promote rigorous historical inquiry, and to distinguish between authentic remembrance and blind veneration. It demands that we cultivate intellectual humility, recognizing that true honor lies not in unquestioning worship of a sanitized past, but in the courageous pursuit of truth, even when that truth is challenging or uncomfortable. The integrity of our collective memory, the robustness of our civic discourse, and indeed our capacity for genuine inspiration all depend on our vigilance against the martyrdom machine. We must be the custodians of truth, refusing to allow the profound acts of sacrifice to be hijacked for transient political gain. We must insist on a history that is rich with human complexity, not flattened into convenient fables. So, as you step back into your day, I leave you with these questions. Where in your own society do you see the martyrdom machine at work, and what truths do you believe it might be obscuring? What specific actions can individuals take to foster a culture of nuanced remembrance that resists ideological manipulation? And how do we teach future generations to draw inspiration from sacrifice without succumbing to the temptation of creating flawless, untouchable heroes? Thank you for journeying with me today through the complex terrain of the martyrdom machine. This conversation, like all we have on The Third Citizen, is about refusing to live on autopilot, about looking critically at the narratives that shape our world. So now, I invite you to become an active participant in this ongoing effort to reclaim nuance and protect truth. Where in your own life, or in the historical narratives you've encountered, have you observed the martyrdom machine at work? Perhaps a figure in your national history, a local hero, or even someone in your cultural memory whose story seems too perfect, too convenient. What uncomfortable complexities about a celebrated figure do you believe we as a society need to confront with honesty, rather than allowing them to be smoothed over for political utility? Share your reflections, your examples, and your insights in the comments below. Your perspective is invaluable in this collective pushback against simplistic narratives and towards building a more truthful, more resilient collective memory. And if this episode resonated with you, if it sparked a new way of seeing, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone else who, like you, refuses to live on autopilot. Thank you for being a third citizen.